In this video, I'm going to do a response video to one created by a channel called the Natasha and Debbie Show. Now, I only recently discovered this channel, but I really like it. So, it's an American couple, and they do reaction videos. This particular video is them reacting to I think it's 50 things you didn't know about Australia, or top 50 things about Australia that are different, or something like that. What I love about their channel is that they do react fairly, they react kindly, and they are logical. So I'll leave the link below in the description for the original video. As is my habit, I've only pulled out sections of their video to respond to. So if you like what you see on their video and you want to see the full video, follow the link, go and check it out. It's worth watching. Anyway, so let's launch into this video, which is an Australian reacting to Americans about Australia, basically. Let's go.
Now that I've been here for almost a year, I've seen a lot more of Australia and come across some more differences. The next difference is the emergency number in America is 911, where here in Australia it is 000. Pretty important to know when you come over here. And then the third difference is
Hold on. So it's 000 in Australia and 999 in the UK. I have issues with this. My issue is this. It shouldn't be the same number 3 times. I get it's simpler, but you know, you have more kids hitting the same buttons or more accidental dials.
True.
You know, where that could be a problem.
Yeah.
Either way, it doesn't matter. I think, personal opinion, that any number to any, like 911, 000, 999, it should be international around the world. Because what if you need help and you don't know?
Yeah, I'd be over there dialing 911.
I know.
And they'd be over here dialing
000, which would just give you the operator going, what do you want? But they'd still send out people. Yeah. This is just my head. Sorry. I'm going to shut up now.
That's a really good point about having 3 numbers the same, meaning that it would be easier for kids to dial it. However, let's not forget that when these numbers were put in place, you had these old rotary dial telephones. And so to dial 000, you basically had the number that was furthest away from the dialing stop. So you would have to put your finger in the hole where the 0 was and flip it all the way around, almost back to where the 0 was, to dial 0. I do like the idea that it should be universal worldwide, but I wonder just how many different emergency numbers there are worldwide. Perhaps it should be, or maybe it already is, something where even though a country has its own designated emergency number, that the other numbers are still set to work.
They have a lot of like half police officers over here. What? I'm sure they have a more official name, but I just call them half police officers. I would describe these people as like parking police officers in the States. You know how we have police officers that give parking tickets, but they're not like real police? Well, they have a lot of those here. Like when I was in Cairns, there were some always kind of like walking the streets around the city that just, you know, kind of keep order, but they're not full-on police officers.
Okay, on behalf of this kid, I'm going to apologise to every single police officer in Australia who has ever had to do the street beat. No, being a police officer out walking around in the city doesn't mean that they are half a police officer. They have had exactly the same training as every other police officer in the squad. It's just that in Australia, sometimes you have capital cities where police officers just make their presence known. They wander around. It's more about community policing. It's about being seen. They're not there to be the big heavy thugs. You know, they're just there to be a presence in case they are needed. It's just part of the culture. In Australia, in the city areas, police officers will walk the beat. I'd imagine that when it comes to the city police stations, that this is simply done as a rotation, and that all police officers in a city police station probably spend time walking the beat. They're not half police officers, trust me.
Next up is dogs are actually prohibited here in a lot of places in Australia. You can't bring them to a lot of beaches and most parks.
To be honest, this is an area where Australia really sucks. Now, as someone who grew up in Tassie and lived in Tassie for much of their life, I found it quite disappointing when I moved to the mainland to find that at many parks you're just not allowed to take your dog there. My dogs used to go everywhere with me in Tasmania, and as far as parks limiting dogs, I can't think of any parks where, provided your dog was on a leash, it was allowed. There are plenty of places in Tasmania that are off-leash areas for dogs, and I think Tasmania is far ahead of the rest of Australia in terms of that. What I found in Victoria and New South Wales, I can't speak for other states because I haven't travelled with my dogs in other states, but certainly Victoria and New South Wales seem to be becoming worse about providing spaces where you can go with your dogs. There are plenty of Airbnbs, there are plenty of, there's a few hotels, there are some caravan parks, providing it's off-season, but there's a lot of parks where you're not allowed to take your dog, even on a lead. And there's also this real strictness about if your dog is allowed in a park on a lead, and if your dog happens to be off lead, people are Nazis about it, at least in Victoria I've seen. I had a little dog who, typical Chihuahua, had his issues, couldn't walk off lead on a lead. So when I moved to Victoria, that limited where I could take him, because the local lake, even though he was doing no harm and I would pick him up if I saw other dogs approaching, I used to have people actually become quite abusive of me walking this itty bitty Chihuahua without a lead. So this guy is spot on, and I think Australia, if anything, councils are getting worse about this. When you see the increase in number of people who are travelling with their dogs, the increase in the number of people who like to take their dogs around with them, I think this is going backwards. And I think that Australia needs to wake up and smell the coffee.
Next up is Australia is far less religious. It is, I'd say, like the cool, the norm thing in Australia is probably to be not religious, or at least you're not really judged for saying you're atheist or something like that. Well, in the States, whether you're actually Christian or not, like everyone just kind of says like, oh yeah, I'm Christian, because it's like the cool, it's the norm to be Christian.
I think Australia is definitely far more relaxed than the United States in terms of Christianity. According to the 2021 census, just under 44% of Australians identify as being Christians, whereas in the United States, looking at the same time period, it says 63% of Americans identify as being Christians. So there is a huge difference there. And I think too what this young man probably sees is that in Australia, people who are Christians and go to church tend to be less outspoken about their Christianity. It's just something that you tend to not really talk about a lot. You don't push it on other people if you are a Christian, and in fact in Australia it's considered perfectly acceptable to be atheist, and it's considered rude to try and push Christianity onto people who choose not to be Christians. You still get your door-to-door Mormons, Seventh-day Adventists, etc. And a lot of the time people will just simply not answer the door for them. But yeah, I guess we are a far more relaxed country in terms of Christianity. Let's not forget, though, also, when you talk about it only being 43% or 44% Christianity, we have a large population of Asian migrants, people from India, China, etc., because we are kind of close to those countries compared to the US. So we do have a lot of Muslims and Hindus and other religions within Australia. So you have to remember that we are a very, very multicultural country. So saying that only 44% of Australian people identify as Christian, we've got to remember that there's also probably a huge percentage of Australians who identify with another religion based on their country of origin. In fact, according to statistics, Australia has 120 different faiths because of its diversity, its multicultural diversity.
And that brings me to number 12, which is you can't or shouldn't drive at night in a lot of places in Australia, like Western Australia, Northern Territory. And that's just because there are so many animals, you have such a high likelihood to hit them that they don't want you to drive. It's not smart.
Nice.
To give you an idea of how, like...
Hold on. Wow?
Yeah.
Is this really a big deal, like he's saying? I mean, those photos are pretty horrifying. Not to say we don't have dead deer a lot, dead raccoon a lot, but still...
But not like that. I mean, that was
horribly and scary.
Yeah.
That makes me never want to come there and drive at night for sure. Like I'd be like, no way.
Yeah, if I'd stay in because I don't want to kill anything.
Wow, that makes me sad.
Like common it is to hit an animal here. Whenever you're renting a camper van, or at least when I was renting a camper van here, I like bought all the insurance and all that stuff. I was covered for, you know, pretty much everything. But the one thing that they would not insure you for is if you hit an animal.
Okay, first of all, that's pretty scummy of rental companies to not cover people for insurance if they hit an animal, because I can assure you that when it comes to private vehicle insurance, any insurance companies in Australia that did not cover people's vehicles when they hit an animal would go bankrupt. People just wouldn't have insurance with that company because it is par for the course in many areas of Australia that you may damage your vehicle due to running into an animal. Kangaroos especially are particularly good at coming out of nowhere and ending up in front of your car. And trust me, when you hit one of them, you know you've hit one of them. Now, in terms of people aren't allowed to drive at night, or they won't, there are plenty of people in Australia who will try and avoid driving at night because of the increased risk of hitting wildlife. Certainly between dusk and dawn, the chances of hitting a roo are much, much greater. And I think so many of us have stories of driving around dusk or dawn where we've hit a roo or a wallaby. But at the same time, you've still got the risk during the day. You've got echidnas who they'll decide when they want to cross the road and they're not going to stop for anyone. Wombats, same thing. As far as the not driving at night, get real. If you've got to go somewhere and you've got to drive at night, you're going to drive at night. There's plenty of people who aren't fazed about driving at night in Australia. There's certainly no laws that say you can't drive at night in Australia. There are some places where you probably wouldn't want to. I've heard that driving the Nullarbor at night is a really dangerous idea. and areas where you get a lot of ruse, people tend to be reluctant to drive at night. But certainly it's not something that is illegal or prevented or discouraged. It's personal choice. Some people try to minimise the amount of nighttime driving they do because they don't want to hit wildlife. But at the same time, intelligent people also reduce their speed when they're driving at night, so that if an animal does come out in front of their car, they've got time to stop.
15 is points on your license, so if you get enough points on your license from tickets here in Australia, then you get your license taken away, and we don't really have that whole point system in America. Also,
where is this guy from? Yes, we do. Yeah, I don't know what he's talking about. You have points on your license in America, just like wherever. It's 12 points, and yeah, I have no idea what he's referring to.
Yeah, I don't know where he got that one from.
No clue, but he's wrong. There are points on your license. Like 12 points, you lose it.
Yeah.
So this is inaccurate.
On your license from tickets here in Australia, then you get your license taken away, and we don't really have that whole point system in America. Also, for the first couple of years where you're like learning to drive, and then once you get your license, you're gonna have L plates and P plates, red and green P plates. Those are like secondary license plates, just kind of saying that you're like a new driver, and yeah, we don't have those in America.
Just to go into that one a little bit further, in terms of P plates and L plates, so in Australia, you can only get your learner's license once you turn 16. You have to complete so many 100 hours worth of driving time. You have to fulfill various requirements. It's quite strict now to be able to get your P plates. Now, to get your P plates, you have to be 17. Before that time, you're technically not a licensed driver. In other words, you're learning. L plates means you're a learner driver, so that you can't drive a vehicle without a fully licensed driver accompanying you in the vehicle. When you get your P plates, then you are allowed to drive alone. We don't have the sort of curfews that areas of the United States have. So, unless that has been brought in and I'm not aware of it in states, and please correct me if I am wrong, but I am aware that in California there is like an 11 o'clock curfew for drivers under a certain age. That doesn't happen in Australia. When you get your P plates, you are allowed to drive. Now, there are restrictions on L plates and P plates. So a fully licensed driver does have 12 demerit points. And if you lose all your demerit points, then you lose your license. Generally, not indefinitely. It's usually for a period of time. You tend to have to go to court, and you get told by a judge, I believe. I think that's how it works. When it comes to L plates and P plates, you have far fewer demerit points than a fully licensed driver. You also have greater restrictions. So if you are a learner or a P plater, you are not allowed to have any alcohol in your system. Likewise, you're not allowed to have any drugs in your system. Although in Australia, marijuana is not legal. So in terms of driving, you're not allowed to have any drugs in your system regardless. But if you are a P plater or a learner driver, then you are definitely not allowed to have drugs or alcohol in your system if you are driving, and I believe that is an instant, you lose your license immediately. In terms of fully licensed drivers in Australia, the limits for alcohol is 0.05. If you're over 0.05, you are considered to be over the limit. You'll get booked. Now, one thing I've heard about is that in America, you have something called traffic school, where if you get booked for traffic offences such as speeding, that you can do traffic school and then you lose, your points are just automatic, like your demerit points are just taken away and you don't lose points on your licence. In Australia, you get demerit points, you're stuck with them until they expire. I think it's a 3-year period, don't quote me on that, but you can't do traffic school and get rid of demerit points. We don't have such a thing as traffic school. In Australia is really strict when it comes to speeding offences, alcohol offences, drug offences on the road. There is a real push constantly to try and keep road deaths down. And as part of that, there is a huge push to keep speeds down, keep drink driving down, etc.
Next up, number 19, and that is that the sun is way stronger here in Australia than it is in America. I said this a little bit wrong in one of my past videos. It's not because there's a hole in the ozone layer, it's because the axis of the Earth's orbit around the sun makes it a little bit closer to the sun during their summer here. And if you still don't believe the sun is stronger here, well, Australia is #1 for highest rates of skin cancer per capita. On top of that, in a lot of schools here, they have a no hat, no play policy. So they do have uniforms here, as I mentioned in my last video. Well, you have to wear a hat as part of that uniform whenever you're outside at, during like...
We're both like,
No.
go ahead.
I think that's super smart.
I was just going to say the same
kids.
thing.
I mean, that's awesome.
My skin cancer runs in my family, my dad's side pretty prevalently. And my dad would never cut the grass out without a straw hat on.
Yeah.
And poor guy he still had quite a bit of skin cancer removed off his face. So that is very smart, very intelligent. Good job, Aussies.
Now, I actually didn't know about Australia being closer to the sun during its summer months than countries in the Northern Hemisphere. But that's actually true. Now, in terms of the hole in the ozone layer, no, there isn't a hole in the ozone layer over Australia, but it is depleted. And that does have an impact on the amount of UV that gets through in Australia. Also, we are a sun-loving country. We're an outdoors country. So we do have a much, much higher rate of skin cancer in Australia. But also, there is far less air pollution in Australia, which is a good thing for us in terms of air quality and quality of life. But it also means that there is less of a filter on the sun rays, so that means that we are getting far more UV than other countries. Now, the sun smart thing in schools, many Australian schools now do that, and many Australian schools, because they do have the no hat, no play policy, have put sun sails in areas of the playgrounds so that kids who don't have hats can still play, but they're not allowed out of that area. Also, in terms of this no hat, no play policy, there is the understanding that during the cooler months, kids still need to get a bit of sun exposure. So the no hat, no play generally runs during daylight savings. And times like before school, when the kids are playing, when the UV level isn't particularly high, then there isn't an expectation for kids to wear hats. But yes, it's definitely a fantastic initiative that Australia uses, and I'm aware that there are some schools that still don't do no hat, no play policies. They put it down to it being too hard to police children wearing hats, but my thoughts on that is you have to create that culture. It may be difficult initially, but over time it becomes a culture. It becomes an accepted culture. And I think you're doing children a disservice not to have that policy in Australian schools. I'm going to stop here. Even with pulling out the main points from this particular video, this young man has some really, really good points. And so this video needs to be a 2-part video, because I still have just as much again that I want to talk about. I have great respect for someone who comes to Australia and who actually does their thing to learn about our country. And the things where I've made comments or corrections are things where I guess if you're not fully submerged in the culture from a young age, you may miss those finer details. So huge kudos to this guy, and I have to say I love this reaction channel. I think they listen really well, they react kindly, and I'll definitely be doing more reactions to their videos because I really enjoy watching these two ladies. So if you are new to my channel, please hit the subscribe button. Help me achieve my goal of 1,000 subscribers. Also, hit the like button and leave a comment. These are all things that are free for you, and they help me to build my channel and to get seen by other people out in the big world of YouTube. Thank you for listening, and I hope you'll come back for more.